Bhagavatam, translation purports by Srila Prabhupada. Uh, Second canto, chapter 2, text 29 or 30. I think we're doing text 29. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
So, this is another very technical, I would say, esoteric verse, which is granina, which means by smelling. Granina gandham, by smelling aroma. Rasanina, by tasting. By exactly rasam, taste. Rhodes palate. Rupam chadrishtya, forms by seeing. Shwasanam, contact. Prabhupada translates shwasanam, strongly would mean breathing, as contact. Tvacha, by touch. Eva, as it were. Shotrena, by vibration of the ear. Cha, also petya, achieving. Naba gunatvam, identification of ether. Pranena, by sense organs. Cha, and uh, akuti, material activities. Upaiti, attains yogi, the devotee. So let's chant this, and then we'll read the translation and purport and see if we can understand what it means. So, granena gandham rasanena virasam.
Granena Gandham
Rasanena virasam. Rupam cha drishtya eva shasanam tvachaiva.
Rupam Chatisya Svasanam Tvajeva.
Shotraina chopetyana bhogunatvam.
Chutrena Gopechana Bhogunatvam.
Pranena chakuti upaiti yogi.
Pranena Chakutyam Yogi.
So the translation is the devotee thus surpasses the subtle objects of different senses, like aroma by smelling, the palate by tasting, vision by seeing, forms touched by contacting, the vibrations of the ear by ethereal identification, and the sense organs by material activities. So, Prabhupada's purport: beyond the sky, there are subtle coverings resembling the elementary coverings of the universe. The gross coverings are a development of partial ingredients of the subtle causes. So, the yogi or devotee, along with liquidation of the gross elements, relinquishes the subtle causes like aroma by smelling. The pure spiritual spark, the living entity, thus becomes completely cleansed of all material contamination to become eligible for entrance into the kingdom of God. So, would anyone like to explain this? So let's start with what seems clear. Again, this is a process by which one is supposed to go from the material platform to the spiritual platform, and we know that we're in this material world because we want to enjoy it or lord it over it, as Prabhupada said. And so somehow these processes, these sort of technical, esoteric, some extent incomprehensible processes, are about letting go of sense gratification, but in a very technical way. So granena gandham rasanena vairasam rupangsha drishya shasanam chaiva shojena. Jopetya. Upetya means achieving. So apparently what has to be achieved here, of course we have smell, and of course we have to remember that smell or fragrance is the special quality, the tanmatra in the Bhagavatam's language, of the earth. And rasanena, flavor, is of water. And rupam is of fire, because with fire there's illumination. You can see forms. And then earth, water, fire, air, and it's by air that you can have the touch sensation. And then hearing is the quality of space. And then so this is going, starting with the gross and going to the subtle. So it's always directional. It's always going from this point to that point, and the point you're going to is always more subtle or closer to the spiritual platform than the place you came from. So it's just more of that. And it has something to do with, because our problem in this world is sense gratification. So it has something to do with transcending at a very, you could say, fundamental, subtle level. Because it's not just a question, let's say, like someone is attached to a certain type of perfume, which has never really been a problem for me, but let's say someone is attached to a certain kind of perfume or fragrance, uh, or you're attached to eating, tasting certain kinds of foods, or seeing certain images. It could be the face of someone you're attached to. It could be all kinds of things. But here is getting to a more fundamental level. It's not just giving up attachment to a particular fragrance or flavor or visual object. It's giving up attachment to the most basic sense of fragrance, or the most just smelling itself, so that it's not this or that aroma. You've just given up attachment to smelling itself, fragrance itself, or to flavor itself, or to seeing particular things on a categorical level. So that's what this is really about. It's about giving up attachment to material objects on a categorical level, not on a specific level. So any questions on that so far? Yes.
Could the jiva actually give, oh, well, okay, I guess the question is, how can the jiva give that up when aren't those senses intrinsic to the jiva, like of smelling?
Well, we have coverings. We have covering senses. Yes, the soul has the power to perceive all these things, but now we're perceiving them through a material body. And so to give up one's desire to enjoy these sense objects does not mean that you give up the desire to engage those sense objects in Krishna service.
So it's like giving up smelling so that I can smell again.
Yeah, it's kind of smelly, but yes, it's well, it's giving up. You're not giving up smelling or fragrance. You're giving up that smelling of fragrance which goes on through the material body for sense gratification. And so we have to remember that this is preparation to leave the world. This is preparation for dying, in the popular term. And so you're not giving up the desire, let's say, to offer something fragrant to Krishna, or to appreciate the fragrance of Krishna or of his flower garland. It's not giving up that basic faculty, but it is giving up the desire to exploit that faculty in the material world. So yes, giving up smelling to smell. That's very poetic. If it wasn't for the word smell. So any other comments or questions on these points?
Why did you think Vyasadeva included these kinds of verses in the Bhagavatam if it's not really of much use to most people.
Well, not today. It's been of use to people in previous ages, and also, in a sense, it humbles us. It shows us that we are really at a very we're practicing bhakti yoga effectively, but in Kali Yuga, because these processes, of course, make sense and are practiced by people who are just in a very previous ages that are in a higher state of sense control and insight and just more advanced civilization. So it is humbling. That's always good. So any questions on these things? Brahmatirtha,
Yes,
do you want to talk about anything about this?
about this, this is all technical for me.
That's technical for everyone.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah,
You know how the New Agers talk about rising above the ego, it's almost like they're trying to get to the,
Well, they're trying to rise above the ego, but they don't understand that that's another ego. Because if you're really trying to rise above the ego, then you give up your totally irrational resistance to someone being God and it's not you. People aren't really against the idea of God, they're just against the idea that it's not me. So, yeah, it's good to rise above the ego. There's stages of it, though. There's stages of it. Yeah, if people want to rise above the ego, as long as they can do so in a very sexy yoga dress.
rise above the ego to find the ego.
Well, they don't rise. I mean, it's rising above certain gross aspects of ego, but then there's the ego of thinking you rose above the ego. It's the ego of thinking that you're spiritual, unlike the people around you.
False ego.
Well, Krishna talks about that in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 14, where he says, "Atra satam nirmala," because the goodness, which is they're aspiring for, like sort of mode of goodness, because it's relatively pure, prakashakam, it's enlightening, anamiyam, and it's not grossly contaminated. So sukha sangena bhatnati, but it does bind you still by your attachment to that happiness of being a good person or being a wise person. Jnana sangena, one becomes attached to one's own goodness or thinking I'm good, or I mean, which you find right in New Age circles, like somehow we're a higher group, we're wiser, and so on. And so the way you can tell that you haven't really transcended fully false ego is that you still don't want to surrender to God. That's the easiest way to check someone. And the philosophy kind of follows the ego. It's not by coincidence they've chosen a philosophy which doesn't require them to actually serve someone else, to actually devote their life to someone else, because even in their sort of mode of goodness, new age way, they're still all about themselves and about how good they are and how happy they are and how much wiser they are than other people.
And spiritual elitism or something.
Well, I wouldn't call it spiritual, but sort of,
well, that raises the issue, can we ever be truly not selfish?
yeah. When you love someone, then you actually, when you really love someone, you have to put aside your own selfish desires because that person, in order to do what is best for that person.
But then you can say that's still selfish because we get something out of that.
We do. It's like if you have children, and when you have children, it's like that's the end of romance,
Yeah,
and it's the end of just like, yeah, we're just like beautiful couple in Paris or something. Actually, that's kind of anachronistic. You've been to Paris lately, you wouldn't say that. So, but the movies, they still keep trying to, milk that. So, yeah, but when you serve Krishna, you can't approach Krishna if you still have that attachment to ego. And so there's a built in filter. In the material world, you can say all the right things to another person, you can do all the right things, and inside you're kind of exulting over how cool, how great it is, and how you have this other person. Well, Krishna doesn't work because the system automatically shuts down when we have false ego. So you cannot approach Krishna unless you give that up. It's like Prabhupada said, you cannot approach the sun unless you become fire. But just like you can't approach the sun and not become fire, you can't approach Krishna and keep your false ego because he's not a fool. You can fake out other people. You can, even people sometimes have to fake out their partners, isn't it, for a higher purpose in the real world, but you can't fake out Krishna. So it's the one relationship where you can't get in the door without a real ticket. So if someone is approaching Krishna, then they've really given up that false ego. Otherwise, I mean, how many people have we seen join Hare Krishna movement and look like Bhakti Yoga all stars, and then one day, where did so and so go? Or they distance themselves in different ways from direct service. I mean, seen it a million times. Because Krishna knows it's the one person you can never fake out. Okay. So thank you everybody for listening. It's not that I was boring myself, I just a little tired. So okay, so Hare Krishna.
Jai.
Yeah, excited.